the possibility of a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. And it's just kind of interesting. There's a draft agreement. It's just short of a final agreement. Yeah, and there are rumors going back and forth. I don't think, last I heard, Israel had accepted it, but Hamas hasn't yet. But Hamas is under tremendous pressure, apparently, by the Qataris to accept it. In essence, what it would be is that they would release half of the remaining hostages, both alive and dead. So that would be something like 10 living hostages and I think 18, remains of hostages. And the Israelis would cease fire. They would halt their offensive operations. They would redeploy, I think, at least from most of the areas where they're now, where the IDF is now located. And then they would allow in humanitarian aid. And both the Red Crescent and UNRWA would be allowed to distribute that aid. This is clearly very important to Hamas. Last time they had a similar agreement, and the Israelis, at the end of the ceasefire just broke it because it's supposed to be a first phase leading to a final ceasefire. And that's the idea of this too. So how can Hamas guarantee that this will actually be honored by the Israelis? How can they be sure that the negotiations, which are supposed to lead to the final ceasefire, will actually be engaged in good faith on the Israeli side, and would lead to a final ceasefire where Hamas releases the final few hostages, and then Israel agrees to stop all, permanently stop offensive operations. Well, apparently Donald Trump has made a statement that he's serious about this. It was that he would, that he expects both sides to carry through, and he's very serious about, both sides carrying through with the negotiations. He says if the negotiations are successful, then there will be then he expects both sides to abide by a permanent ceasefire. Now, that's so far, that's the best that Hamas could get out of them. They're trying to get some sort of concrete guarantee, that this won't just be another temporary ceasefire leading to further offensive operations. And they did get the statement from Donald Trump. But, how much is that worth? It may be worth a little something, but I don't know if it's worth much. So you can understand why Hamas is very hesitant to agree to this. They're trying to get some sort of real guarantee that the Israelis are going to, to truly honor, are going to work towards and ultimately conclude a permanent ceasefire. But Netanyahu himself has said, and so many of, other Israeli leaders have said they have really no intention of doing this. But, what can Hamas do? They're in a very, very tight position. Right. The people are starving to death, and, their territory has just been utterly devastated. And they just have a few hostages left. So they're I think it's fair to say they're in a desperate situation, a very desperate situation.
So right now, is the status that the ceasefire hasn't been accepted or rejected? Because when I Googled about the ceasefire earlier, mainstream media is reporting that Hamas is rejecting the ceasefire deal proposed by Witkoff and approved by Israel.
Right. I think I saw that last night. I didn't see that this morning. It's still being described. I think the negotiations are ongoing. Hamas hasn't accepted it yet, but is under a lot of pressure to accept it. But you can understand where they're trying to get something a little bit more, something just a little bit more solid than this statement from Donald Trump that he's serious about it, and in making the two sides actually honor a final agreement.
Do you think it really matters if there's something solid? It doesn't seem to, international law, binding agreements don't seem to slow down Netanyahu and his government.
Right. Well, I think if we look at the previous ceasefire, first of all, it's important to recognize that by and large Israel didn't honor it. Or they to some extent they did. They halted almost all offensive operations. So they did continue to conduct strikes. They did kill. I can't remember what the number, but I wouldn't be surprised if actually killed hundreds during the last ceasefire. But it was, it wasn't thousands. They weren't killing at nearly the rate. So, the violence went way down. But they didn't let in anywhere the amount of humanitarian aid that they had promised to to let in. They didn't let in, equipment that was supposed to be made available to the Gazans to start clearing the rubble and finding the bodies. They didn't provide anywhere near the number of tents that they were supposed to provide, and they didn't provide, is my understanding is they didn't never provided any, basically, trailer homes that were supposed to be, again, supplied as housing for homeless Gazans, of which there are many. So they violated the ceasefire in many, many ways, and I think we can expect that they'll do that again. I'm sure that Netanyahu is very reluctant. Netanyahu and Smotrich and these people are very, very reluctant to go ahead with a ceasefire because they are clearly, they have this plan, which you can see in action, in which they haven't really made any effort to hide, to ethnically cleanse Gaza. They're pushing them all to the south. They established those 4 distribution centers, woefully inadequate, but enough to draw more people to the south, and a very, very not even all of southern Gaza, nowhere near to it. It's just a zone within southern Gaza, close to Rafah. The obvious intention, and again, it's the stated intention, is to move all Gazans into that area, as the first step in a plan to ultimately ethnically cleanse Gaza. This would be kind of the this is just prior to the relocation of Gazans to other countries, like we've heard about Libya or Sudan, or I think there was another country I can't remember that they were discussing. Now, I don't know if this will ever happen, but that is the plan. And this plan will have to be suspended if the ceasefire goes into effect and if the Israelis honor it in any significant way.
Why would Hamas not accept a ceasefire? They need aid. I don't think it weakens their position overall. Any guarantee that's provided by the United States or Israel, they know is not worth much. So why not accept it? And I think the bigger thing about this is that if they accept the ceasefire, every subsequent pause, cessation of hostilities from Israel, and then restart of these hostilities just damages Israel even further. It's not a good move on behalf of Israel. And if they have to stop again right now while in the midst of this starvation crisis in Gaza, this massive humanitarian crisis, and then they stop for 60 days, some aid comes in, and then they start it again, like the world will be even more upset and Israel become even more of a pariah than it already is. At that point, we might actually see some real sanctions from countries around the world.
Well, I think you're probably right. Now the Gazans, I think they understand like the only leverage that they have are the hostages, or to be more accurate, really the hostages and prisoners of war. The soldiers that they have are not hostages; they're prisoners of war, and they don't have many left. They're trying to get the absolute best deal. They really, you say that if they restart it, that's going to look really bad for Israel, but it's also just going to be horrible for Gaza, right? So they want to try to get some sort of meaningful guarantee, that this temporary ceasefire of 60 days will lead to a permanent ceasefire.
But they know that's not going to happen, right? Yeah. I mean, we talked about that Penn State poll, the last one. 82% of Jewish Israelis want the complete expulsion of all Gazans from Gaza, all Palestinians from Gaza. So if you have that overwhelming of a majority within Israeli society, that force will drive forward no matter what, whether or not Netanyahu's in power, whether or not you get some type of permanent ceasefire agreement. The Israel will not accept that. They're at this point where they've openly stated, and it's out in the open, that our campaign is ethnically cleansed. If you're Hamas, you're not giving up all the hostages, so you don't have any other bargaining chips. Your people are starving to death. You do this, get some temporary reprieve for your people, and then you know that it's going to start again. You can stockpile some food. This campaign of ethnic cleansing has been stated openly to the world. It's here again. And when it starts again after the ceasefire, or if the ceasefire breaks down immediately, then it's just going to put Israel in a worse position, in my opinion. I don't see, whereas if Hamas rejects this ceasefire proposal, it makes Hamas makes them look more like the bad guy, right? They'll be able to say, Hamas, they could have had aid, they just have to accept the ceasefire.
Well,
that's my opinion.
Yeah. I think that Hamas is actually hoping that the Americans, namely Donald Trump, I think that's their only hope. And this is, it's a bad, to pin your hopes on Donald Trump is, is a sign of sure desperation. But they are desperate. And, there is really only one force in the world that can stay Israel's hand, and that is the United States. And I think the only reason that Israel is actually willing to accept the ceasefire, because this is clearly not what Netanyahu and his people want to do, is pressure from the United States, which may also reflect some pressure that's coming from Europe. So that's what they're hoping for. And it's going to, I agree, it's going to look very, very bad. It's better than nothing, but it is also, if they feel like they have some chance of actually getting a permanent ceasefire and ending this for good, they're going to go for it. But I think, to be honest, they really don't. That's the terrible thing, recently there was the release of the dual citizen, the Israeli American
Eden Alexander.
That was a goodwill gesture on the part of Hamas, and apparently Witkoff had promised the Hamas that, okay, if you do this, we'll make sure that some humanitarian aid comes in, and it didn't. Apparently he made no effort, or the Americans made no effort to honor their side of the agreement. At least that's that's what I'm hearing. And then we saw what happened with the first ceasefire. Netanyahu was telling everybody, "Hey, we're not going to honor this. Don't worry about this. This is temporary, and we're going to go." So I can understand why they're hoping against hope, because again, their situation is so desperate, and temporary is better than nothing, but it still means the ultimate total destruction of Gaza, and the ethnic cleansing of the Gazan people. There's only just a temporary breather. Maybe, the outside chance, maybe that's really what they should be hoping for, is increased pressure, from other nations in the world. But, so far that hasn't done anything for them. I think they're looking to the United States, and they're trying to get some sort of really concrete, meaningful guarantee from them. But I don't think they're going to get it.
Right. I think Hamas should know that they can't trust the Israelis or the Americans on anything. I mean, the whole world is understanding this. Iran understands this very well now. Russia understands this as well. So the more that this goes on, it just continually just erodes at any trust or integrity that might be left within the West, is just disappearing quickly. It's like you can't do agreements with these guys. So we'll see what happens. But I mean, whether or not, if there's a ceasefire agreement signed, or I don't expect it to be honored by the Israelis. If the Hamas pushes back and tries to push for some permanent plan for a permanent cessation of hostilities, like the original ceasefire was, it was a 3-step plan.
Right.
I don't think they should put any hopes in that coming to fruition, especially like I said, the intent of the Israelis has just been laid bare for everybody to see. They're very open about it, and I think that's causing a lot of Western governments around the world, a lot of discomfort. They don't know how to handle it. It's like, oh, you guys said it so publicly, and the polls are showing so publicly that you're ethnically cleansing, that this is genocide now. We're seeing starvation. It's hard to hide.